Okay, so I'm curious as to your thoughts now on this next point. And so I appreciate how thorough this is. I think this is going to be very helpful to people, including social media. So share this out, guys, as I still see these arguments circulating. So the next telltale marker, climatic cycles also allow for testing. As it turns out, these cycles caused by regular variations in the eccentricity or ellipticity of Earth's orbit and the tilt of Earth's orbit correspond perfectly, he says, with what's seen in those core layers. So what would is that true? They correspond perfectly, Mike?
No, not perfectly. Where does that come from?
Dr. Hugh Ross here in his article, Deep Core Tests.
Another indication of poor scholarship. That, first of all, they're not perfect. It's in their scheme, it's kind of a rough correlation. And like I said, there's almost zilch power in the 100,000 year cycle. The tilt has a lot more power, and but it's a 100,000 year cycle. That's the main cycle in all this. And they'll only use the tilt and the precession for more minor things, but not the major oscillations they think are from the Ice Age. The Ice Age repeats every 100,000 years, they claim, for the last million years. But before a million years, it was every 40,000 years, which just happens to match the tilt cycle. I wonder if there's some circular reasoning in there too.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't know why it would switch from 40,000 to 100,000 years. But anyway, that's a conundrum that they're still working on. They have all kinds of them, but this is just poor scholarship.
Because they are, especially those in the old Earth creation camp, Mike, they reject the worldwide flood and they argue it's a local flood to the world of the ungodly. We've addressed that many times. Yeah. But the point is, aren't they now rejecting a lot of the mechanisms and after effects of the global flood, like the warming of the oceans being just one of them, to explain what we see in terms of the Ice Age, as you've gone over in your presentations, Mike?
Yeah, they probably accept the secular view of the Ice Age with multiple Ice Ages. And they in rejecting the flood, you reject so many other things, and when you bring the flood back into Earth history, you can account for many anomalies, like even caves, right. The rapid formation of speleothems, and other phenomena, rapid ice age for ice cores. Yeah, it's the difference between taking the biblical record, the plain, clear-cut biblical record, versus adding man's interpretations from the universities and try to jam it into the Bible and use that to explain things. No wonder they get themselves in trouble and make statements like this.
Right. I completely agree. And in terms of explaining the Ice Age, the rapid formation of caves, as you pointed out, when it comes to limestone, do you believe that the rapid formation of a lot of the limestone could have occurred when the fountains of the Great Deep broke open? They could have released a lot of the necessary chemicals for that formation, do you think, Mike?
Yes, it's glad you asked that, because I'm currently this winter writing a book on the origin of caves, kind of like the talk I gave several years ago. And I'm supposed to make it understandable for middle schoolers. I have to give them a chemistry lesson even.
Right.
So I did look at the carbonate. 20 to 25% of the sedimentary rocks are carbonates. 20 to 25%, that's a lot.
Wow.
And we're not going to get that from fossils and that sort of. it has to come from the fountains of the great deep from below the surface. Yes, plus other chemicals came from the fountains of the great deep. But yes, all that carbonate comes from that first. And then it has its own cement. I mean, calcite, which is limestone essentially, is a cement. So it could cement itself and harden. And then, so yes, I would definitely say it had to come from chemicals from the fountains of the great deep. The way it works is that it's dissolved in the water. And that, under the right conditions, it settles, it comes out of solution and is deposited. So carbonates are a chemical sedimentary rock. They make up 20 to 25% of all sedimentary rocks. And I might add that more than half of these carbonates are what's called dolomite, which is calcium magnesium carbonate, 50% calcium, 50% magnesium ions that bond with the carbonate. And the interesting thing about dolomite, which, like I said, is more than 50% of carbonates, is that it requires very hot water for dolomite to come out of the solution. Temperatures over 100 degrees centigrade are required. And we have huge dolomite formations, especially the older the ages, the more dolomite, which indicates to me the early flood had a lot of hot water. And some of these dolomite, as well as carbonate formations, that cover hundreds of thousands of square kilometers, and they can be hundreds of thousands of meters, hundreds of meters thick. I mean, we're talking about monstrous deposition. And dolomite being from hot water indicates that another clue about the early flood being hot water. So, yes, I do believe it all came from the fountains of the great deep, which would be hot by definition.
So much research, so little time, Mike. But I love the explanatory power of the flood model, rapid formation of all these things that skeptics of young earth creation argue is a contradiction to young earth creation, Mike.
Yeah, we're developing the flood model, and the more sophisticated it becomes, the more questions and challenges we'll be able to answer. So yes, sticking to the Bible.
Amen.
And then examining the data, like 1 Thessalonians 5:21, my theme verse for research. Examine everything carefully. Actually, there's only one carefully in it. I'm just emphasizing it. But hold fast to that which is good. You hold fast to the Bible as God's word. And I found when you do that and you look at the data, you can answer challenges. And I see a lot of evolutionary actualistic data because I keep up with about 50 earth science journals in the Montana State University Library. So I'm quite aware of challenges, many challenges. And we haven't answered many challenges because no one's actually had time to research it. We don't have a lot of researchers in earth sciences.
It makes it more fun, in my opinion, to be a young earth creationist, having these challenges and therefore these research projects. If we had all the answers, then there'd be nothing to study or research.
Dull, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Research in science would be dull.
And it's always exciting when you go into a challenge, scripture first, as you've pointed to, Mike. We go and we prayerfully consider these things. And it's always exciting when you come up with an answer. I'm curious, this is a little bit off of what we're looking at here, but in terms of the challenges you've looked at and you've offered answers for, what are a couple of your favorite challenges that you've looked into, researched, and come away with a good answer?
Well, I would say one of the biggest challenges that was given to us is how do you account for dinosaur tracks, dinosaur eggs,
right,
and bone beds that have carnivorous dinosaur teeth in it, indicating they were scavenged. How can you explain that early in the flood? So that ended up with the beds model, which I suppose I've talked about that on this program already, have I?
You've given a whole thorough presentation on it.
I thought so. They're called the beds model. Caves are a big challenge. That's why I've gone into those. The Ice Age itself is a challenge. By the way, I might add that when I'm doing research on a challenge, I gather as much of the observational data as possible. And most of the time, I find that first of all, it's a challenge to the conventional scientists too. They really can't explain this data either. But a person wouldn't know, because a lot of times in a university classroom or reading a book on the subject, you wouldn't get into it. They don't get into it. And so, or they'll add a hypothesis saying, oh, this will explain it, when it's just a speculation. So that's what I discovered, first of all. Secondly, in about 50% of the cases, I can find a reasonable solution within young Earth creationism. 50% of the time I can. About that, I haven't counted it, but that's kind of off the top of my head. So that's what I find when I look at challenges.
I find the same thing. I spend a lot of my time in the world of genetics. And when I'm looking into a lot of these topics related to endogenous retroviruses, chromosome 2 fusion, and so on, I'll find the best answers or problems directly in their own literature, and especially in their lectures, because you won't see internet apologists or critics of young Earth creation oftentimes discussing the problems or challenges with their model. You got to go deep into their literature or
Yes.
deep into their lectures to
Yes.
find your pieces of gold.
Yes, deep in the literature. And that's why I write those perspective articles for the Journal of Creation, because I find these, but I do not have time to do a full paper on them. So the perspective articles is a 1 to 3 page announcement of, hey, this great data, here it is, so forth. And hopefully someone else can run with it. Maybe I can run with it if I have time, but I have so many irons in the fire and research projects, I don't have time to do that.
We could just retire from needing to sleep, and that'll give us another 7 to 8 hours every day, Mike, for research.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next point here, you're doing an excellent job, Mike. Appreciate this. So we just did climatic cycles. And here's the other big one, as we know, which we kind of touched on. Hugh and other proponents of old Earth creation or just naturalistic evolutionists, they'll say researchers have performed radiometric dating of minerals embedded in the ice to make sure their age corresponds with their annual layer. And according to him and others, in each case it does. So they have these different things they'll look at to corroborate their argument or dates with ice cores. What would be a good response to this, Mike?
They can't date with radiometric. They can't date an ice core with radiometric dating. I've heard of attempts, but I never run into it anymore. I have no idea where he picked that up. And how could radiometric dating be so fine to pick out an annual layer of 1 year?
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Half-lives are billions of years, and it doesn't make any sense on itself. And the fact that he says it does, this is just beyond poor scholarship.
It seems like it's more of an assertion. Like, well, we'll perform radiometric dating of these minerals embedded in the ice, and it just so turns out that their age corresponds with their annual layer. And in each, and that would be pretty precise, like you said, Mike, to correspond with it. That's every year, according to them.
Yeah, the minerals would be in the dust, and that's pretty fine. No, it's just not true at all.
Mike, what are your thoughts on, so in this article, he goes into one or two of how young earth creationists respond.
Yeah.
So he goes into the burial of the lost squadron.
Mhm. Yeah.
But he says intrusions into the layers by localized forces and events does not invalidate them, as in the dates they get from the ice core dating. What are your thoughts overall on the lost squadron? And then his point about the intrusions.
Yeah, he had a.
Because some creationists would say, well, the lost squadron was under 250 feet of ice
Yes,
and
true.
snow in only 50 years. So basically,
Yeah. What that is all about is that they didn't know about this. Was a local bullseye of heavy precipitation in southeast Greenland. About 1.5 to 2 meters of ice accumulation a year. And they didn't know about it until the Lost Squadron. And, they should have had some idea because it's close to the semi-permanent Icelandic low just to the southeast. So it should be an area of heavy precipitation. In fact, I happened to just pass through Middleborough, Kentucky, when they were just finishing the putting together of Glacial Girl that they brought up in pieces. That's the airplane they brought up. And I asked the supervisor, how deep did they think the ice was before they went out there? And he said about 30 feet. So, but no, it's a local bullseye of heavy precipitation. Now, we can't use that to say that the ice occurred rapidly to account for except when the ice sheet was low, that would apply, because right now at the top of the Greenland ice sheet, it's only about 25 centimeters of ice a year, much less. It's an indication of what we can get, or when the ice sheet is still building, you're going to get meters per year. And this is close. The southeast Greenland is close to the Icelandic low, and that's pretty cold water. So you don't get a lot of evaporation from it, but you still get 1.5 to 2 meters of ice accumulate a year. That should say something, especially if you have all of Greenland that's not glaciated yet, and you have it surrounded by warm water, which would evaporate much more water vapor than in the Icelandic low area. So it gives an indication how fast it could build up.
right.
So that's what it tells us. We can't say that that's the amount of precipitation for all Greenland. Now that'd be going too far. But it's just
is it basically just an analog to how quickly it could build up? Not that this applies universally.
Yes, exactly. It's an analog of when it was low altitude, like southeast Greenland's low altitude, and with no ice, and it's just starting to build. This gives you an indication that, hey, in our model that starts from 0, we can get meters per year of ice accumulation for quite a while during the Ice Age. So it can be used as an analog for our claims of meters per year of accumulation early in the Ice Age, especially.
Right, because in your presentation, you said at the end of the flood, we as creationists, according to our model, we'd start with 0 ice, and then the ice would build up throughout the Ice Age that lasted roughly 700 years.
Yep.
And so it'd build up rapidly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we dealt with those points, and this is what I love is, from what I've seen in your two presentations here, Mike, you've addressed their major points on this issue, but I haven't really seen a good counter or rebuttal to the model that you're presenting. Have you, Mike? Have you seen?
I haven't.
And I look, and I haven't seen anything worthwhile.
I wish the skeptics like Hugh Ross, Biologos people would actually read and analyze my material and other creation scientists' technical material.
Right.
The fact that they don't, and I've read their books, and they hardly refer to any of our material. If they refer to any of our material, it's Whitcomb and Morris's Genesis Flood, which is pretty old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Me, this is a sign of poor scholarship.
Yes.
Because if you want to rebut an argument, you need to find out what those people are saying first. They need to find out what we say and first before they counter it. Obviously they don't. And it looks like they make up stuff.
Yeah. Or attack they're not engaging our stronger points. They're attacking older points, or maybe points that aren't as strong, weaker points, but they're not engaging the best that our side has to offer, like what you've offered here on the Ice Age.
Yeah.
But then they'll tell their audience that, well, or their readers, well, ice core dating refutes a young Earth, but then they're not engaging our best points like you've offered in these lectures.